The Sony 100mm 2.8 STF G Master lens is arguably one of the finest portrait lenses that Sony has to offer. But ever since they released the 135mm 1.8G Master lens, people have been asking me which is better between the two. In today's video, I'm going to compare these two lenses, walking you through the pros and the cons of each one so that you can make the best choice for your next portrait session. Now, I've done individual videos covering the basics of both of these lenses, so if you want to learn more about them and learn the intricacies of each one, check those out. I'll leave a link for each one in the description below. Ever since Sony released the 100mm G Master lens, I've used it in almost every portrait session, including studio and outdoor shoots. It's the lens that I reach for when I wanted something a little sharper than my 85mm G Master lens, but a little less sharp than the 90mm G macro lens. There were many times that I could remember where I would sometimes do an entire photo shoot with just that one lens. Then a few years later, Sony released a lens that I was eagerly anticipating, the 135mm 1.8G Master lens. It's a focal length that I used to shoot with a lot when I was a DSLR shooter, mainly for its ability to give great results when shooting close-ups, as well as full-body images when you're shooting on location. Okay, the stage is set. Two amazing portrait lenses, but how did they perform when I put them head-to-head in a photo shoot with Julianna? Before we take a look at the results, I want to take a moment to thank the sponsor for today's video, Skillshare. Skillshare is an online learning platform with more than 25,000 classes in areas like photography, retouching, content creation, design, and tons of other skills that we all need to continually improve in our art. It's an invaluable resource that I've been using for years now, and the best part is that you can access their entire library of content for less than $10 a month. That's less than what you'd spend for a few cups of coffee, but the value that you get will probably help you buy many more cups of coffee in the future, thanks to all the new skills that you're going to learn. I'm really happy to tell you that I've been able to work something out for you guys where the first 500 subscribers that use my link in the description for this video will end up getting a 2-month free trial. Head on over and join more than 7 million creators, including me, who are learning new things every single day with Skillshare. Now, to compare these two lenses, I decided to head out on this overcast day to the downtown area of Denville, New Jersey. I shot each lens in the same environment within moments of one another and shot every image at their wide open apertures of either f1.8 or f2.8. Keep in mind that with the 100mm GM lens, while it has an f2.8 sized aperture, the STF element is actually causing less light to enter through that aperture. That's why it's rated at a t-stop of 5.6. This means that most of my shots taken with this lens will have to be shot at a higher ISO in order to match the exposure that I'm getting with the 135mm 1.8. With all that out of the way, we walked around the block and took a variety of photographs in different spots. I used both lenses on the Sony a7R IV using continuous, wide area focus, and using eye autofocus to make sure that everything came out nice and in focus. Let's head over to the computer and take a look at a few images close up. Okay, so welcome to my desktop, and we're going to take a look at some of the images from this photo shoot. As you could see here, there were 634 images that were taken of Julianna, and we're going to look at about maybe 16 or so images. Half of them are going to be with the 100mm, and the other half are going to be with the 135. I tried to do my best to try to replicate, the location and the lighting and things like that, but being that we were shooting in available light, at times, the lighting would change, and so we just did the best that we could. But I feel like these images are going to give you a pretty good idea of the strong points of each lens and maybe where, it kind of falls short in comparison. So the image here on the left taken with the 100mm, the one on the right taken with the 135. And these images have only been adjusted as far as the exposure. I did boost the exposure on both of these images. I tend to shoot a lot of my portraits underexposed, So take that for what it's worth. So settings and everything you could see there. And we're going to start off here by just punching into the image so that we could take a look and see a few different things. I'm really looking at the sharpness and the amount of detail that each lens is able to resolve. Looking at the color, just to see if there's any, variance or shifts in colors. And so we're right away just zooming into the eye, and hopefully this translates on screen, but hopefully you guys can see here, the 135mm lens looks to be quite a bit sharper than the 100mm in this particular image. Okay, so looking at the eye, looking at the skin, it looks like there's quite a bit more sharpness and detail. There is obviously less grain because this was shot at ISO 200, and in order to get similar type of exposure with the 100mm STF, I had to be at ISO 400. So that did introduce a little bit of grain. Honestly, I don't think in either case that it really, makes a difference. I've shot images at, 1000, 1600 ISO, and it still looks really good. And the grain looks, more like grain, which is great. So, but again, just kind of looking at the skin here, you hopefully will be able to see that this 135mm does capture quite a bit more detail in the eyes, in the skin. Zooming into the hair here, there, of course, you're not going to notice as much difference. Looking at the out of focus areas, of course, this isn't going to be one of the images that we're really going to be able to determine too much in terms of the out of focus area. But you can see that for a nice tight headshot, you get a pretty nice, decent amount of blur in those areas of the image that are blurry. Let's go here to this top corner. So the 135 obviously gives you really like a lot of blur, but it's doing something kind of cool here in that you're able to kind of retain some of that color. As you can see, it's a lot more vibrant versus the 100mm. So on this particular image, I would tell you that for this close-up style of shot, so far the 135mm is up by 1. So I would say for this one, definitely I would have preferred to have had the 135. So let's take a look at the next image. Okay, so now looking at the second set of images here, again, the image on the left was taken with the 100mm and the one on the right was taken with the 135. Settings, of course, have changed again. We're still shooting wide open. However, you have a f2.8, which is again representing as 5.6. You have a 1.8 here on the right. And what I was really looking at is to see, you might have noticed in the video that we were shooting in front of a bank. That's up in the right corner. This is the drive-through of that bank. And so there's going to be times as a portrait photographer where you're taking photos in an area where, the background's not very pleasant. And that's where these lenses really shine, in that they really kind of crush and blur out that background. So I wanted to see what that out of focus area would look like between these two lenses. And so on the left hand side, you could see that it is really nice and blurry. You do have your attention drawn towards the subject. Of course, shooting at f1.8, it really just becomes more of like an abstract type of background. I guess if you really, really look closely and you knew what you were looking at, you can kind of tell like, okay, this is the drive-through of the bank. There's kind of like a driveway here. There's grass. So it is defocused really nicely, but obviously the 1.8 just turns everything into something that looks a lot more beautiful and a lot more creamy. So, but of course, with portraiture and with these lenses, it's not all about the background. It's about what it's going to do for your subject in terms of resolving details. So let's zoom into the image here. Okay, so now looking at the image close up and just kind of scanning across. So there's a few things here. So the sharpness between the two here, I actually think the 100mm turned out to be quite a bit sharper in this particular shot. The eyes look a little bit sharper. Skin seems to have a little bit more detail. kind of like the fall off here. So you still have the face really nice and sharp. You have a little bit of texture in the neck, being that this is at f2.8. At 1.8, you have the face in focus, but you start to get the neck out of focus. Same thing with her sweater, you know, starts to fall out of focus in different areas, to where with the 100, it's still decently sharp. So the other thing that I'm noticing as well is, and again, these are raw images. The only thing that was adjusted in these images is the exposure. It was either boosted up or kind of brought down a little bit. I would venture to guess most of these, it was just boosted a tiny bit, because I do tend to shoot all of these underexposed. But you know, the white balance was another thing. I'm noticing the skin tones look quite a bit different. Being that I haven't adjusted the white balance, I didn't say this on the last set of images, but I do kind of like the skin tone a little bit better on the 135 and the way that that's being represented. So, you know, again, this is one of those kind of like you pick it situations. You definitely get a lot more background blur using that 135. But, you know, in this case, I think that it actually resolved a little tiny bit more detail on the 100. I mean, it's kind of arguable, being that we shot these at f1.8, the area underneath the eye here looks slightly more detailed on the 135. So this one is kind of a toss-up, not sure. Let me know in the comment section which one you like better here on this second set of images. I'd like to get your feedback. Let's take a look at the third set of images. Okay, so here is the third set of images. Once again, shot wide open. The 100 STF on the left and the 135 on the right. And again, just kind of looking at this as far as the background, you're going to notice that you have a really nice defocus background with the 100mm, and you have an even more out of focus shot here with the right with the 135. Now, for me, for my taste, I actually don't mind the look of the background blur on that 100mm lens. I feel like this 135 is starting to get you into this territory where the image is just too out of focus, in my opinion. Like if you look at her sweater, for example, there's parts that are in focus, parts that are out of focus. There's just a little bit too much going on for me in terms of the depth of field, but you know, again, it's all a matter of personal taste. Let's look at the sharpness here. Let's zoom into this image and let's see if we can tell which one is a little bit sharper. So, you know, again, I am noticing that the skin tones look quite a bit more natural and a little bit more pleasing coming out of the 135. It's almost like it's got a greenish type of tint to the 100mm lens. And again, this isn't something that I've noticed that happens often. Could just be the day, the location that we were shooting. You know, we were shooting by grass. And it was overcast, so maybe, I don't know, maybe that was reflecting into the skin. But looking at these two shots, I mean, to my eyes on this monitor, the 135 is still much, much sharper, getting a lot more detail underneath the eye. Skin is far more detailed. You can see a lot more pores than you can on the 100. And then, of course, looking at the defocused area, you do have definitely a much more defocused background. So, you know, on this one, I would say I probably would lean more towards the 135 between these two images. Again, let me know in the comment section which one of the two you think looks better. And remember, these are raw shots, so they have not been retouched. If you want to see what they look like retouched, check out my Instagram page, because I will be uploading images throughout the next few weeks from this set. So let's take a look at the fourth group of shots and see which one turned out better. Okay, so here we have, again, on the left, the 100mm, on the right, the 135. And this is another scenario. We were in front of a restaurant. They hadn't opened yet, so she ran over, sat down, and we took these shots. The lighting was pretty similar, pretty comparable. I was able to shoot at ISO 100 at this point and ISO 500 on the 100mm. Again, that tended to fluctuate based on the location and if it was, you know, overcast and all that good stuff. But let's take a look here. Let's zoom into these images take a look at them nice and close. Holy cow. All right. So the shot on the left, and again, these are the selects that I picked. These are the ones that kind of went through the 634 images, and these were the shots that if I was going to retouch and deliver these to a client, these would have been the picks that I would have made. Of course, now zooming into this, you could see that this 100mm STF lens is crazy, crazy sharp. I mean, it's super detailed. I would say that in this case, I got my focus dialed in pretty good with the 100, and it looks like it might have been a little bit off on the 135, which led to this kind of, you know, soft look. So yeah, in this case, I mean, obviously the STF lens here did a really good job. I mean, looking at the hands here, lots of detail and sharpness. You know, looking at the hair, looks great. Skin looks great. Eyes look nice and sharp. The 135, I think the skin tones here look a little bit better. Looking at the two, they look pretty comparable to one another. So, you know, it could have just been that location that we were shooting at where we were just getting a lot of green that was reflecting onto our skin. Between these two images, I personally like the one that was taken with the 100 STF. I feel like the pose was better. There's obviously a great amount of detail. Just everything about this one. I tend to like this one quite a bit better. So right now I'm kind of leaning more towards the 135 overall from the images that I've seen so far, but you can see that with the 100mm, you can get some really, really, really great results. So let's take a look at the next set of images. Okay, so for this next set of images, I almost got her to give me the same pose twice. So it makes it a little bit easier for us to kind of compare, you know, the two images side by side here. So first things first, one of the things that is kind of like a feature of the 100mm STF lens is that you get this kind of like circular bokeh, which is really beautiful. It's something that you start to see in more expensive lenses, where you see points of light actually represented as a circle. If you see it on the G Master, you start to get kind of like this football shape. It's not perfectly circular. You know, those are things to me that I'm not really so concerned about. I'm more concerned about the detail and how it renders color. But if that's something that floats your boat, you know, you might be a little bit more interested in this lens if you're, you know, shooting in maybe low light situations and you want to have your bokeh looking interesting. So, but let's take a look close up here. Let's see what we have for detail. Again, on my computer here, looking at it close up, the 135 seems to have quite a bit more detail in the skin, in the eyes. The lips appear quite a bit sharper. I'm going to do a 3:1 here. So, yeah, so, you know, even here looking at it, this is a 3:1 close up here. So it's really close. No one will ever see your portraits this close. But since we're doing a lens comparison, we're going to zoom in really nice and tight here. And you can still see that, you know, skin tones are looking really nice on the 135. Good amount of detail all throughout the shot. You know, I right now for this particular image, looking at the background and seeing just the out of focus bricks, seeing the flower pot here out of focus, I think an argument could be made really for either lens. But again, if you're looking for that kind of like blurry background type of look and that subject isolation, I think the 135G Master is really exceptionally amazing in this case. As sharp as sharp of a lens that 100mm is, I'm actually kind of shocked up to this point that the 135 is just it's doing quite well. I think maybe the next video that I do might have to be the 135 versus the 90, which is the sharpest lens that I know of that Sony makes. Right now, it's making a pretty good fight here. So I'm picking the 135 here in this little comparison. Again, let me know in the comments which one you like better, and let's move on to the next set. Okay, for this next set of images, I wanted to try something a little different with the settings. I know I told you guys I was going to shoot all of these wide open, and the rest of the images from this video will be shot wide open, but I wanted to try something a little bit different just to see if the images would look a little different if I was shooting at a higher f-stop on the 135mm lens. So for this comparison, again on the left, we have the 100mm, the 135 on the right. I shot the 135 at an f2.5, so almost the same aperture as what I would get with the 100mm. And I really wanted to compare the difference in terms of the background blur and the detail if you just close down a tiny bit on that 135. So as you can see, we're shooting with this Chinese restaurant in the background. It's really colorful. If you see it in person, it's beautiful. But there was a lot of cars in the background, and I tried to get a shot where you could see a vehicle in the background so that we could compare how blurry we can get those backgrounds to look. Even though we're not shooting them all wide open. So you could see the 100mm shot wide open, you could still kind of tell that there's a car in the background. It is defocused, but if I'm looking at her face, I could still tell there's a car here on the left. As opposed to the 135 shooting it at an f2.5, there's a car here on the right, and you could still tell that there's a car, but I think if you're looking at her face, it's not jumping out at you that this is a vehicle, this is the tail end of a car. So I don't know, let me know what you guys think in the comment section, but to me, I think if I was shooting on location and it was a busy background, I probably would be more likely to shoot with this 135 because I know if this is what it looks like at an f2.5, at f1.8, that's just going to be a blurry blob there. But let's take a look at the sharpness here. Let's see what the detail differences look like between these two images. And of course, when we zoom in, it's not going to be, perfect here, unfortunately. But we'll scan throughout the image here just to take a look and kind of identifying different areas here of the face. The skin is really nice and sharp on both images. The eyes look to be almost the same. I mean, they're both at a very similar aperture. Skin texture on that 135 still is picking up really well. Again, when you're retouching an image and you want it to have like a realistic type of look, you're going to want to make sure that your raw image, which is basically what you're seeing here, has that skin detail there. You're not going to be able to create texture where there is none. And so at f2.5, you're still able to capture quite a bit of detail, quite a bit of texture. You can see on the nose, the lips, everything just appears to be pretty sharp. So with this set of images, again, I'm leaning more towards that 135. Let me know what you guys think in the comment section, which ones you guys like better. Let's take a look at our 7th set of images. Again, left 100mm, right 135. And again, we found a spot that had some lights so that we could see what those points of light look like when they're defocused with each image. And again, you could see you're getting this, hold on, there it goes. Getting this nice kind of circular bokeh pattern with the 100mm. With the 135, if you can find it, it's more of like a football shape of bokeh. So again, depending on what your tastes are for your out of focus elements, something to kind of look at. Looking at the umbrellas, you can kind of see very clearly, this is Corona. Here in the background, pretty much all the umbrellas are defocused. The background obviously is way more out of focus at f1.8 than this lens at f2.8. But again, we're taking portraits. We want to make sure that they're nice and sharp. And so we'll scan through this image here, looking at the skin. And we do have a little bit of a difference with the ISO from 250 to 500. Not a huge difference. I think detail-wise, they actually both look pretty good. Eyes are looking nice and sharp. Pretty good amount of detail all throughout the image. So between these two, I would say that, it's kind of a toss-up. It really just depends. If you have a really nice, interesting background, I think this is enough blur in the background to still isolate the subject, but still let you know that, they're probably in front of a restaurant, as opposed to, the shot on the right being shot wide open. You really don't get as much of a sense of what those things are in the background. So if you're shooting on location and it's somewhere that's kind of interesting, you might want to reach for the 100mm. because even if you're shooting it wide open, you're going to get a good amount of detail in your subject's skin. And then you're still going to have a nice, pleasant defocused background. But looking at these two images, I'm still leaning towards that 135. It's looking really good. Let me know what you guys think in the comments for this 7th set of images. Which one do you guys like better? Let's go on to the last set. Okay, so here is the final set of images. Again, the one on the left taken with the 100mm, one on the right, the 135. Both of them shot wide open. This is kind of like an alley that's in between two buildings. And so there wasn't a ton of light. It was already an overcast day, so I had to bump up my ISO to 800 in order to get a similar exposure to what I was getting shot wide open f1.8, ISO 320 on the 135. But check this out. Let's zoom into these images here. Let's wait for them to resolve. We'll go to 1:1 here. All right, so this is another one of those examples where this 135 just really runs away in terms of the detail that it's able to resolve here. You can see in the skin, a lot of texture, a lot of detail. You could see kind of like the two buildings here, and you can kind of see me right there. See, that's me. So a lot of detail, a lot of texture. I'm going to go across the image here. You know, the grain looks pleasing at 320. So this is another really good example of where, you know, the 135 really shines. If you're shooting those really tight close-up headshots, you're going to get something that's going to look pretty good. Now, if you have the 100mm, looking at this shot on the left, I mean, the background still looks nice and blurry. The image still looks really pleasing, but I think for me, I'm really more interested in not only having a blurry background when I'm going to shoot wide open, but I'm also really interested in making sure that I have a lot of texture in the skin when I'm shooting a portrait. So again, I'm leaning more towards the 135, and I would say overall in this particular photo shoot, I would say that the 135mm just ran away with the title, you know, between these two lenses. But I'm really interested in hearing what you guys think. Let me know, based on the images that you're seeing from this photo shoot, let me know which one you guys thought was better. Did you prefer the shots from the 100? Do you prefer the shots from the 135? If so, why? Let me know in the comment section of this video. If you guys want to see more lens comparison videos like this in the future, let me know. I've got a couple of other ones that are on deck that should be coming out in the next few weeks. But let me know if you want to see more information that I cover in those future videos, and I'll make sure to do that. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.